The corridor smells like wet wool and cigarette smoke. Your new ID card sticks to your palm. Somewhere behind frosted glass, a phone rings and never stops. You memorize faces. You memorize doors. You memorize what not to ask. One slip, and paperwork turns into a missing chair. This is your life, level by level, inside the KGB. Junior Lieutenant, Junior Case Officer. You learn the rules by watching what happens to people who break them. Your day starts with drills and dull rooms. A classroom off Lubyanka Square. A chalkboard covered in dead-drop diagrams and surveillance routes. You run behind a senior officer through Moscow courtyards, counting entrances, counting exits, pretending you're just late for work. At night you sit in a parked Volga with a thermos of tea, watching one stairwell for 6 hours, writing down who carries a briefcase and who carries a loaf of bread. You don't make the decisions. You execute. You photograph documents with a Minox. You log license plates. You stand in a post office line to spot who meets whose eyes. You tell yourself it's training. You tell yourself it's temporary. You tell yourself the state notices everything. The first time an informant goes quiet, your handler doesn't raise his voice. He just takes your notebook, flips to your sloppy timestamps, and asks why the window was missed. A mistake here isn't a bruise. It's a file opened in your name. You learn fast. In this work, even silence has a report number. Senior Lieutenant, Case Officer. You get autonomy, and your own mistakes become your own signature. You stop writing in the shadow of a mentor. Now you walk into meetings alone, coat buttoned, face flat, carrying a matchbox with a microdot hidden under the label. Your cover job has a desk, a stamp, and a phone that you answer like it's real. You run surveillance from a cafe near Mayakovskaya, watching reflections in the window, counting the seconds between passers-by. You recruit, quietly, a translator who wants a better apartment, a customs clerk who wants imported medicine for his mother, a foreign student who wants his visa extended. You give them exact instructions, 3 knocks, then pause. Leave the envelope behind the third radiator. Never say names on the line. Autonomy feels like oxygen until you realize oxygen can burn. You tell yourself you can control people. You tell yourself you can read fear. You tell yourself you're still just an instrument. One wrong approach and you don't just lose an asset, you create an enemy with your face in his memory, and your file grows heavier without you touching it. Captain, Senior Case Officer. You command the field, and responsibility starts wearing your uniform. Your office gets a door that closes, and a map that stays on the wall. You lead a small team: surveillance men, a technical specialist, a clerk who knows every cipher form by heart. Mornings are briefings with folders marked by city: Helsinki, Vienna, Kabul. Afternoons are debriefs that smell like sweat and cheap cologne. Men reciting hours of tailing, every turn, every cigarette break. You coordinate operations instead of simply running them. You decide who watches the embassy gate and who sits on the phone intercept. You allocate film, petrol coupons, safe house keys. You write instructions that other people carry out in real streets, with real consequences. Leadership is a louder kind of loneliness. You tell yourself the team needs certainty. You tell yourself hesitation kills. You tell yourself you can't afford sympathy. When an operation fails, it doesn't shatter in the field, it lands on your desk like a broken glass you're expected to drink from. You've learned to watch, then to recruit, then to command. Next, you become the resident, the face of Moscow abroad, and every friendship starts to feel like an instrument. Level 4 Major, Resident. You run a station abroad undercover, translating Moscow's appetite into local reality. The embassy radiator ticks all night. Your office sits 2 doors from the cipher room, close enough to hear the punch of the one-time pad machine through the wall. You wear a diplomat's smile in the morning receptions, toasts, bland jokes in a language you speak like a tool. By afternoon you're in the back seat of a government sedan, eyes on the rearview mirror. noting the same beige lotta 3 intersections in a row. You manage case officers, each with their own agents, each with their own lies. You schedule safe house rotations, approve brush passes, and sign out cash in hard currency that never appears on any embassy ledger. You read local newspapers like terrain. You read your own staff like weather. The burden is translation. Moscow sends demands in clipped cable phrases. Obtain access, neutralize approach, identify vulnerability. You decide what's possible, what's theater, what's suicide. You tell yourself the cover is solid. You tell yourself the locals are predictable. You tell yourself the center understands. Abroad, you don't just run operations, you live inside a mask that can't be taken off without tearing skin. Level 5 Colonel, Chief Resident. You own the network, the budget, and the failures that never make it into public history. The guest list is a weapon now. You stand beneath chandeliers at a National Day reception, counting who arrives early, who lingers near the military attaché, who avoids your gaze. In your pocket, a cigarette case hides a tiny paper strip with meeting times: bus stop 1420, museum steps 1605, church courtyard 1810. The next morning, you're in the station vault, inventorying radios, forged passports, dead drop containers, and the locked drawer of emergency extraction money. You don't just lead officers, you shape the station's posture. You decide which ministry to penetrate, which journalist to cultivate, which emigre group to surveil. You authorize risky, illegals, support, coordinate with GRU rivals when ordered, and argue by cable with Moscow over unrealistic tasking. Power tastes like paperwork. You tell yourself the metrics matter. You tell yourself one more recruit justifies the pressure. You tell yourself the center rewards results. And then a source is arrested, and you realize the only thing thicker than your files is the silence between your cables. Level 6 General, High Command. You stop running operations and start steering the machine that runs them. Your meetings are in rooms without windows. Long tables, watered tea, ashtrays emptied by men who never speak unless spoken to. On the wall, maps with pins that aren't just cities anymore, they're factions, pipelines, parties, borders that can be pressed like bruises. You sign directives with an ink pen that never leaves the building. Reports arrive in stacks. Agent evaluations, counterintelligence alerts, requests for technical gear, disciplinary notes, condolence drafts. You decide which resident gets reinforced and which gets quietly recalled. You approve promotions, deny them, or let them rot in the middle. One phrase, compromise suspected, can end a career without a courtroom. At this level, the burden is distance. You feel everything as statistics and risk matrices, yet you still remember stairwells, safe houses, the smell of wet wool. You tell yourself the system needs firmness. You tell yourself loyalty is measurable. You tell yourself outcomes justify strain. The higher you rise, the more your hands look clean because other people do the touching. There's no rank where the work stops following you home. Only different doors, different keys, different words for the same pressure. You learn to speak in codes until plain sentences feel dangerous. You learn to trust procedures more than people. And in the end, what stays isn't the power, it's the habit of listening for footsteps that aren't there.